Have you ever had that neighbor who thinks the whole world revolves around them? That type of person who confuses rights with poetic freedoms and believes that the universe needs to bend to their will? Well then, now imagine that neighbor as a Bogan Karen. Yes, that foolproof Australian combination of rudeness with an inflated sense of entitlement and zero grasp of boundary. And of course, this story starts with her and ends with bulls. But hold on, we're not rushing in with the bulls, literally. First, let me set the scene. I live on a farm in the countryside of New South Wales. Those nice, quiet areas, fenced in, where the predominant sound is the mooing of cattle and the rustle of the wind through the trees. A peaceful, respected place, and until a few months ago, untouched by urban dramas. But then the estate emerged, one of those hasty expansions that pop up out of the ground with fancy names like Green Valley Residence or Sunset Hills, but which ultimately house the same parking space fights and people who think they can extend their dominion over everything they see. And in the midst of this new civilized village, a peculiar figure stood out. You know the type. Bleached blonde hair, always with sunglasses perched atop her head, and a passive-aggressive energy that you can feel from the other side of the fence. She referred to herself as the informal spokesperson of the Strata, but I affectionately started calling her Bogan Karen. The first time we exchanged words was when she came to ask me if it would be a problem for some kids to play near the fence of my farm. Note, the electric fence. I explained with all the patience in the world that it was a working rural area with large and unpredictable animals, that it wasn't safe or permitted to cross. She gave a little smile, like someone who hears but doesn't listen, and replied, "Oh, but they just want a bit of nature, you know." Yes, Karen, nature. That same nature that weighs half a ton and has horns. I chuckled to myself and carried on, thinking that was the end of the story. Spoiler? It wasn't. Karen started gaining confidence. She began to think that because she lived nearby, she had some sort of moral access to my property. And then, my friends, her imagination took off. Unleashed dogs wandering along the farm trail, neighbor kids playing ball near the water troughs, and the pinnacle, an invitation to a group picnic. That's right, she organized an event on my farm, without asking for permission, as if it were a public park with a rural buffet included. If you think that's crazy enough, wait until you find out what she had the audacity to do on a Sunday afternoon, because this is where the story really picks up pace, and I honestly was already tired of being the understanding farmer. For those who have never lived in rural Australia, it may seem exaggerated, but let me tell you, rural space around here is treated with the same care that a surfer gives to their board, or that a retiree protects their parking spot at Bunnings on a Saturday morning. And me? I take care of my farm with nearly religious zeal. My property is about 45 hectares. It's not a mega farm, but it's enough land to raise my cattle, keep the pasture well maintained, ride the quad bike up and down, and still have a quiet corner where you only hear the wind and the off-key singing of a few galas. All of this is fenced, signposted, and, important detail, with a locked gate. In other words, everything is clearly marked, everything is well defined. Now bear with me. Within about 800 meters from there, a high-density estate began to sprout, the kind of developer project that promises sustainable country living with urban comfort. But what they really deliver is noise, disrespect for others' space, and a bunch of residents thinking they're in a resort. In the first few months, it was relatively calm. Some neighbors introduced themselves, sent those messages saying, "We're happy to be here. If you need anything, count on us." All very nice, very cordial. But then the aforementioned Bogan Karen entered the scene. Karen was one of the first residents. She moved in as soon as the first block was ready. And, like any good Australian story of Karen meets country life, she quickly assumed the role of unofficial community representative. I don't know who gave her that title. Maybe she did it herself, which honestly wouldn't be a surprise. She knocked on the gate of my farm with a concerning frequency. First, it was to ask if she could take some photos with her kids in the sunflower field, which, by the way, weren't sunflowers, they were forage rape flowers. Then she came to ask if she could walk her dog along the trail by the river, always with that little charm. Smile, sunglasses on the head, coffee cup in hand, and the ready phrase, "Oh, I know it's private property, but it's so beautiful here." That phrase, that damned phrase. It's as if the fact that something is beautiful automatically justifies trespassing. By that logic, can I enter her house and use the bathtub just because I find it charming? But Karen didn't stop there. She started encouraging other people to explore the area. Oh, go on. The owner is a nice guy. Nice guy, sure. Fool, no. One day I came home to find a group with a camping tent set up a few meters from the cattle yard. Another time I stumbled upon a couple doing maternity photos, with the future mom's belly leaning against a fence that was honestly holding a 600-kilo bull on the other side. And look, it's not like the farm looked like a park. The fence is there, with clear signs, private property, no entry. There are warning signs about the animal, signage for aggressive cattle, and even a warning about the risk of electric shock in some parts of the electric fence. And still, people come in. Why? Because Karen normalized it. She spread the idea that it was kind of an extension of the leisure area of the complex. And the most absurd part, she started referring to my farm as the green backyard of Strata. Yes, she called my private property a shared natural living space. Shared, Karen? Since when have you been paying rural property tax here? Since when do you help feed the animals, control the weeds, or maintain the fence? Seriously, sometimes I thought she was going to set up a Strata stall in front of my gate and start charging entry with a cheese tasting. It's important to say, I tried the civilized route. I sent emails, talked to her in person, patiently explained that this was not allowed, and above all, was dangerous. But she always had some ridiculous counter-argument. Once, she said that nature is a common good. Another time, she claimed that if no one complained, then there was no problem. And my favorite. But on Facebook, everyone loved the view. It's good for enhancing the neighborhood. Ah, the old argument that likes justify invasion. And it was from that point that I started to notice something more serious. The pattern. Karen wasn't just inconvenient. She was invasive by conviction. She thought she had the right to decide the use of a space that wasn't hers. And worse, she started to influence the other residents. The seed of spontaneous access had been planted. And, as you can imagine, when that seed germinated, what sprouted wasn't just weeds. It was a full-blown event. A sunny Sunday. A bunch of people I'd never seen in my life. Folding chairs, ice boxes, and frisbees. All on my property. Sunday. Clear sky, gentle breeze, and that unmistakable smell of freshly cut grass mixed with road dust. Perfect weather for whom? For the average Aussie to have a Barbie and a beer outdoors. And up to that point, all good, if it's in your backyard. But it seems our dear Bogan Karen woke up inspired that day. Inspired and absolutely devoid of any notion of private property. I woke up early, as usual. I did my rounds on the quad bike, checked the pasture, inspected the water troughs, and prepared for a quiet Sunday. But something wasn't right. When I stopped at the lower part of the farm, near the southern fence, the one that faces the so-called complex, I heard a distant sound. Music. But not just any ambient music. It was John Farnham blasting, followed by laughter and the occasional pop of a beer can being opened. I followed the sound, and then the scene unfolded before my eyes like a 90s summer commercial, only with less glamour and more property invasion. Fence wide open. Picnic blankets spread out, people in swimsuits, even without a pool, kids running wild, some with frisbees, others trying to climb the riverbank rocks. There was even a lady with one of those camping chairs, complete with a sunshade. It looked like they'd brought half of Bunnings into my farm. And right in the middle of the chaos, her, Bogan Karen, wearing sunglasses, a floral dress, holding a glass of white wine as if she were in her own backyard. She was laughing, telling some scandalously uninteresting anecdote, surrounded by 4 couples and at least 8 random kids. For a moment I froze. The audacity was so absurd that for a few seconds I genuinely wondered if I had hit my head. I looked at the access gate, broken open. Not damaged, but clearly unlocked and wide open. It had been opened carefully. It wasn't a brute force invasion. It was premeditation. They knew exactly what they were doing. And the icing on the cake? A portable table with cold cuts, sliced fruit, fresh juice, and sparkling wine. Sparkling wine, mate, in the middle of the pasture, next to a mineral salt trough for cattle. I felt my jaw clench. I got off the quad bike slowly, trying to maintain a civil tone. But before I could say anything, Karen came over to me, as if she were meeting the owner of an Airbnb. Hi, how's it going? I hope you don't mind. We just wanted to enjoy the lovely day. Just wanted to enjoy. Just like that. As if I were the caretaker of a recreational club and not the legal owner of a functioning farm. Karen, you're on my property. Without permission. With a whole group. What exactly did you think was going to happen here? I asked, trying not to raise my voice. She laughed. Laughed, as if my indignation was an adorable mischief. Oh, relax. No one's doing anything wrong. It's just a picnic. We cleaned everything up before we set up, I promise. I even thought about sending a message, but I figured you wouldn't mind. That phrase. I figured you wouldn't mind. It's the official mantra of every citizen who lives on assumptions based on their own navel. I wouldn't mind, I repeated, almost laughing. You opened the fence. You came in with 15 people. You're playing loud music, drinking, surrounded by kids running on land with cattle. Do you have any idea of the risk? She huffed, rolled her eyes, the embodiment of disdain disguised as urban zen. Oh, what an exaggeration! The countryside is empty, and I thought you'd be more flexible, you know? Flexible. Of course, why not? Tomorrow they'll bring a trampoline. Next week, a food truck. Soon they'll be doing handstands in the paddock while the bulls applaud. Karen then tried to soften the situation. Look, if it's a problem, we can leave in a little bit. We're almost done anyway. Just one more little toast, okay? A little toast, in plural, because it was clear that the group was getting tipsy. The voices were louder, the laughter more uncontrolled, and there I was, with a lump in my throat between anger and disbelief. I went back to the quad bike without responding. I left slowly, but not before taking some photos. The security cameras installed around the perimeter had also recorded everything. And you want to know? It was at that moment, watching that festival of collective delirium under the command of the Queen of Strata, that I realized I had already been patient enough. The time for diplomacy was over. When I returned to the homestead, I sat on the veranda, took a deep breath and thought, they want to use the farm as a park? Fine. Let's then deliver the full rural experience. I had a trump card. A group of young bulls recently transferred to a secluded area of the farm. They are docile, yes, but large, intimidated by strangers, and completely unpredictable near unfamiliar people, especially on hot days with loud music. And since they had been confined for days in a smaller space, they were restless. Perfect for what was to come next. Karen thought she could control the space, that she could rewrite the boundaries of the property based on her personal taste. But in the countryside, the rules don't change just because you brought a platter of cold cuts, and thus was born the idea that would change that Sunday, and her relationship with the concept of open field, forever. Some people, when faced with such an invasion, call the police. Others try to talk once more, appeal to empathy, write a long post on Facebook. But those who live in the bush learn a basic lesson early on. Certain creatures don't understand words. They only respect electric fences or fierce animals. And Karen, clearly, was already vaccinated against common sense and dialogue. So a practical, silent alternative with a lasting impact remained. Give her and her crew exactly what they came looking for. The complete rural experience. But with all the elements, including those that bellow and dig the ground with their hooves. I went back up to the upper part of the farm where the bullpen is located. There were 5, young, muscular, with more muscle than sense, especially under the 2 o'clock sun. There was one in particular, Benji, who, despite the friendly name, had a temperament that would make any politician run. And he was the leader of the group. Wherever Benji went, the others followed. They were in a fenced yard, waiting to be transferred to a new pasture, a space that, by cruel irony, provided direct access to the part of the farm that our dear Karen had invaded. I opened the gate of the yard with the calm of someone preparing a rare wine for a special guest. Nothing abrupt, nothing that would cause immediate alarm. Just a small logistical adjustment, a strategic repositioning, the kind that doesn't hurt anyone but makes an impact. The bulls, upon seeing the open space, began to walk, a bit hesitantly at first, sniffing the air, and then Benji took the lead. I returned to the highest point of the property and watched the scene unfold as if I were attending a rural opera. The kind that mixes the Phantom of the Opera with Mad Max. It was all so cinematic that I even thought about turning on the drone camera, but I preferred to just observe with a cup of tea in hand and my soul at peace. The picnic music was still playing. Now it was cold chisel. Kids were laughing. Adults were taking selfies with the countryside in the background. And Karen, Karen. There she was, standing in a nearly ceremonial position, holding a tray with glasses of sparkling wine. You could clearly feel she was the queen of the new rural world. If there were a crown made of bottle caps, she would be wearing it. It was then that everything changed. Benji appeared first. He emerged from behind the hill with an air of superiority, neck extended, sniffing the wind. The others followed one by one, forming a natural semicircle as they explored the area. The picnickers, of course, took a while to understand. At first, they thought they were cows. Someone even exclaimed, "Oh, look how cute!" A phrase that lasted exactly until Benji planted his hooves on the ground, stared directly towards the music, and let out the first bellow. The barbecue soundtrack turned into a soundtrack of tension. The bulls didn't run. They walked with the calm of those who know they dominate the terrain. The energy shifted. The children stopped. One of the adults slowly rose from their chair looking around. And then someone finally realized, "Are those bulls?" Followed by, "Are they coming this way?" And finally, the classic Australian panic. "Mate, I think we should go." Karen, however, maintained her pose. She hadn't yet processed the danger. Perhaps she thought the bulls were just coming to say hello, or that it was some kind of rural attraction. After all, in her mind, the farm was probably a kind of zoo without cages. But Benji isn't a fan of selfies. When he started to trot, the domino effect was immediate. Chairs flew, glasses fell. People stumbled over their own sandals. Kids were pulled by the arms. One woman lost her sandal and preferred to run barefoot through the mud of the water trough rather than risk facing the beast. And the most beautiful part? All of this happened without the bulls even touching anyone. They approached in a group, commanded respect, and showed who was in charge of that piece of land. They knew they were in their territory, and made sure to make that clear. And Karen? She finally realized the reality. She tried to maintain her composure but was swept away by a wave of panicked neighbors fleeing in all directions. Someone shouted, "There are kids! There are kids!" as if the bulls would distinguish by age group. Another asked where the gate was. Another yelled something about a process. I just watched, in silence, with the satisfaction of someone who has just seen the universe deliver a practical and definitive lesson. In the end, no one was hurt. The bulls stopped when they reached the spot where the chairs and blankets had been. They sniffed the ground, rummaged through remnants of sandwiches and stayed there, chewing with a look of disdain. The humans, in turn, left as best they could. Some jumped over the fence, others crawled underneath. Some forgot belongings behind, bottles, coolers, even an iPhone that ironically had a case with the phrase, "Good vibes only." After half an hour, there was only silence, and bulls, and me. I went down there in the late afternoon. I calmly closed the gate. I gathered some of the abandoned junk, took a few more photos, just for legal safety, and put up a new sign. Warning, aggressive bull, enter at your own risk, in large font, in bold, 3 times, because if anyone still thought this was a playground up to that point, well, it was time to face the fact. The next day, the complex was in an uproar. Emergency meetings, hysterical messages in the Strata group, accusations flying back and forth, and Karen? Karen had the audacity to send me a message you won't believe. Monday morning arrived heavy, but not for me. I woke up calm, had my coffee looking at the still dewy pasture, and watched the bulls resting under the trees as if nothing had happened. Total peace. On the other side of the fence, reality was different. The complex woke up in crisis, a mix of moral hangover and selective outrage. And of course, the Strata WhatsApp group had turned into a digital war zone. Messages popped up like popcorn in a pan. People asking whose idea it was. Others complaining of ankle pain from jumping the fence. There was a lady who demanded formal explanations about the presence of dangerous animals so close to the residential area, as if I had released a crocodile in the middle of the playground. And at the center of all this, guess who was there? She, Karen, leading the narrative as if she were a victim of a rural conspiracy. The message I received from her was a masterpiece of revisionism, an entire paragraph accusing me of acting irresponsibly by allowing loose bulls to approach civilians. Civilian, she used that word, as if we were in a war zone. And mind you, the woman who opened my fence, organized an event without permission, and ignored all warnings, was now playing the martyr of a collective trauma. I laughed loudly. But I didn't respond, not yet, because I knew what was coming next. On Tuesday I was invited, or rather gently summoned, to attend an extraordinary Strata meeting to discuss the incident from Sunday. The irony of being called by an entity I'm not even a part of amused me greatly, but I accepted. For pure entertainment, the meeting was scheduled for the newly opened community hall. I arrived a few minutes early just to observe the movement. The room was full, middle-aged adults in polo shirts, women in floral scarves, and that smell of cheap citrus perfume mixed with social tension. A projector was on, displaying a static image of the complex from above, as if it were a war strategy to be analyzed. Karen took the lead, as expected. With a handheld microphone, unnecessary since the space was small, she began her emotional speech. She said that the episode had been a turning point in the harmonious coexistence between residents and rural surrounding. She spoke of scared children, panicked families, and of course, her deep disappointment with the lack of dialogue from the property owner. That's when I requested the floor. I stood up slowly, walked to the front, and pulled out my USB drive as if drawing an ace from my sleeve. I plugged it into the projector, and within seconds, the whole room was watching the footage recorded by my security camera. The invasion, the opening of the gate, the picnic setup, the children, the adults, the frisbees, the wine, everything. Karen went pale. And not that, oops, I made a mistake, pale. It was a, I'm being unmasked live, pale. I let the video run for 2 minutes and then paused it. I spoke calmly, without raising my voice. What you're seeing here is not a coincidence. It's a group of conscious adults invading private property, fully aware that they were doing something wrong. If an accident had occurred, the responsibility would have fallen on those who violated the boundaries, not on those who established them. I was patient. I explained beforehand. I was ignored. And now I'm being accused? Silence. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to shrink. Karen tried to react, with that tone of defensive indignation. But it was just a picnic. We didn't cause any damage. The invasion is damage, Karen, I replied. You opened my fence. That, in itself, constitutes a crime. Not to mention the risk to minors, the objects left in the pasture, and the complete lack of awareness in ignoring all the warnings. You put yourself and others at risk. And now you want to play the victim? She opened her mouth to respond, but one of the neighbors interrupted her. Karen, why didn't you ask us to vote before organizing this? I didn't even know there was going to be a picnic. Another added, my son was there. You told me it was safe, that the farmer had authorized it. And just like that, like a wet house of cards, her narrative began to crumble. Questions arose from all sides, and Karen started to retreat. She said she just wanted to do something community-oriented, that she thought nothing would come of it, and ended with the classic line of every exposed offender. If I'd known it would be like this, I wouldn't have done it. Of course she wouldn't have. Because now there were consequences. At the end of the meeting, most attendees agreed to issue a formal apology for the invasion. Karen, embarrassed and visibly irritated, left before the meeting adjourned, leaving behind her reputation as the ambassador of rural harmony. And me? I went back to the farm, with a light heart and a reinforced fence, and with the certainty that sometimes the countryside teaches lessons that the city cannot even imagine. But the true reflection on this bizarre episode was yet to come, because deep down, the issue wasn't just about a picnic. It was about something much deeper, the delusion of ownership over what does not belong to you. A few days after the epic episode that became informally known in the neighborhood as the Bull Attack, which, let's face it, would be a great name for a B-movie, I sat on the farm's porch, looking out at the field that was now happily free from clandestine picnics, and started to think, what makes a person like Karen act that way? The most obvious answer would be ego. But it's not just that. It's a specific type of inflated ego, fueled by a distorted sense of entitlement. And the most curious thing, it's a behavior that has been gaining traction, especially in Australian suburban environments where the comforts of modern life begin to clash with the very real limits of rural space. And that's where the emblematic figure of the Bogan Karen comes in. This hybrid creature, formed in the collision between the arrogance of, I know what's best for everyone, and the typical indifference of someone who has never had to deal with a real bull. Because, you see, it wasn't just an invasion, it was an attempt to reinterpret reality. In Karen's mind, my farm wasn't a working rural space with potentially dangerous animals. It was just a big empty lawn, and therefore useless. A waste of Instagrammable landscape that, for some reason, She believed she had the right to socially redistribute. This behavior is more common than it seems. It starts small: a walk beyond the gate, a selfie on a fence, a football kicked accidentally to the other side. But it soon evolves. The thought process goes something like this: if no one is using it, then why can't I use it? As if the absence of direct oversight justified the appropriation. It's the same kind of logic that makes people pick flowers from someone else's garden, park in a neighbor's spot, or take a souvenir from an Airbnb, but on a larger and more dangerous scale. Because when this sense of entitlement encounters a space that offers no immediate resistance, it settles in, and when someone tries to impose a limit, that's when the tantrum starts, the screaming, the accusation of rudeness, of lack of empathy, of intolerance. But there's no empathy that justifies disrespect, and even less so invasion. Nature, as Karen herself said, can be a common good in the poetic sense, but not in the legal sense. A farm is a productive unit. It has an owner, responsibilities, logistics, and risks. It's not a backdrop for a maternity shoot or an improvised trail for the neighborhood dog. And there's more. Karen's behavior wasn't just individual, it was contagious. Because when someone positions themselves with such certainty, with such an air of authority, other people start to follow. Even if they're suspicious, they end up being swayed by the confidence, or by convenience. Oh, she said it was fine, so it's all good. That's how one person's delusion becomes the blunder of many. But what bothered me the most was the later attempt to rewrite the story, to flip the roles between villain and victim. This, to me, is the essence of Karenism, the inability to take responsibility for one's action. There's always a justification. There's always an excuse. There's always a, "I just wanted what was best." Well, sometimes wanting what's best requires asking first, respecting boundaries, recognizing that the world doesn't revolve around your perception of comfort or beauty. Sometimes the good you want to do is only good for you. At the end of the day, it's not about being unfriendly or not wanting to share the view. It's about something more basic: respect. Because if you see a fence, physical or symbolic, and still decide to cross it, then it's not freedom that you seek, it's dominance. And then, my friend, at some point, the bull comes. And that's how a simple Sunday afternoon turned into one of the most surreal chapters of my rural life. All thanks to a Bogan Karen, her glass of sparkling wine, and an unshakable conviction that private property is a flexible concept. In the end, no one got hurt. But many people walked away with bruised egos, especially those who thought the countryside was a theme park and that city rules applied where the asphalt ends. The lesson here isn't just about fences or bulls, it's about respect. About knowing where the right to enjoy the view ends and the duty to ask, request, consider begins. And yes, Karen, this applies to you too, especially to you. If you've made it this far, first, congratulations. You've survived the account of an undeclared war between gourmet urban life and rural common sense. Now tell me, have you ever been through something similar? Had to deal with someone who thinks they own what belongs to others? That figure who appears in your life uninvited, already giving orders, already suggesting, already taking over. If so, share your story in the comments. I need to know. And if not, enjoy it while you can. Because where there's a gate, there's always the risk of a Karen wanting to open it. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Because here, my friend, the stories are as real as the cows grazing on the other side of the fence. And yes, some have horns.